Good morning, Pete. It's really good to be meeting with you, and I'm looking forward to learning more about your life and your family and what life is like ministering in Lesotho. But before we begin, sorry.
No, just saying thank you. It's a real pleasure to be able to chat about Lesotho and our family. Thanks for that.
Before we start, Pete, maybe you can tell us a bit about your journey before you came to Lesotho. Where did it all start?
So it all started, I grew up in Zimbabwe. I won't tell the whole story about that, but it started really with me meeting Steve Oliver back in, I think it must have been 2001. I was in a very little town about an hour north of Harare, and I was serving a church there, learning about farming God's way, and it was during that time that Steve did his very first it was, I would have said it was one of his first apostolic journeys to the church that we were part of. It was called Kingsway Church in Bindura. And Steve came and visited, and during that time he saw me. We met for the first time, and he then invited me to come to Clarens to serve the church there. So being young and free, I said yes. So that was sort of how I ended up in Clarens in 2000. It was 2003 in the end.
Well, that's so interesting. And the adventure began. What was it like in Clarens? How long were you there for?
So he initially said to me, come for 3 months. So I bundled up a few things from Zimbabwe, and I remember Clarens was extremely cold. It was just getting towards winter, and in Zimbabwe we've got a very mild winter, and Clarens was it was a very rude awakening to what cold weather's like. So Clarens can get down to about minus 18 degrees. And I think in that first winter it was pretty bad. So I remember being freezing. But I was also very excited because I got to meet my wife. That was where we met for the first time. It was in Clarens. She had actually come from Swindon Family Church, and she'd been serving in the school that Dihlebeng Church runs in Clarens. She had been there for a year, and I'm really glad that she had decided to continue serving there for an extra year, because if she hadn't, I wouldn't have met her. So that was, and then a year later we were married. And then we ended up living in Clarens for about 4 years.
Wow, that's exciting. Yes, so that's where you met Joe, and your life together started. And your children, were they born there?
So our children were, our first son Jacob was born in Bethlehem. So in fact, all 3 of our boys are born in Bethlehem, which is quite funny. But Jacob was born in Bethlehem, and we lived in Clarens for a further 2 years. During that time, I was involved with helping to lead the church plant that Dihlebeng had planted across the river into Lesotho. And when I came from Zimbabwe, I came with a real desire to see Farming God's Way being established in the community there in Lesotho, and so that was what I did, or spent most of my time on. Was I think we worked out in the 4 years that I lived in South Africa with Joe, while still working in Lesotho, I must have done the journey across the border over 1,000 times. So it was busy. It was a busy time. And then our second son, Ben, Joe was pregnant with him when we moved to the village in a little village called Hatabahulu, which is where the church in the north of Lesotho is.
Why did you end up moving there? Did you find it was just too much, all that border crossing, or did you want to be more in the community?
It was definitely more to do with being in the community. So Joe and I had been asked by Steve if we would consider being, if I would consider being an elder in the church there with another gentleman called John. So we thought about it, but also we felt that it was important for us to be part of the community if I was to be an elder in the church. Yeah.
And was that a big upheaval? I mean, was it a big adjustment for you all?
It was massive. So we have a very nice house in Clarens, and that's got electricity and running water and all of those what we might call normal comforts of life. And moving into the village was very different. So there was no electricity. In fact, I think it was for our first month or so, we didn't have a fridge, so that was a big adjustment. I would collect water. So I was possibly the only man in the village at the time who would collect the family water. So that was quite strange for people. So it was a very big adjustment. I think many people thought that we were quite strange, and well, certainly in the village, people thought we were strange, and I think people outside the village probably thought we were mad. I think for Joe and I, we just felt that we were being obedient. Yeah.
Wow. And how was the language situation there? Do people in Lesotho speak English?
They do. So I would say, a good proportion of the population speak English. I'd say about 50% of the people that we talk to have a good grasp of English. But right from the beginning, we both felt there was a need for us to give the local language, which is Sesotho, a try. So Joe can understand quite a bit. I talk quite a lot. I can speak quite a lot of the language. I'm a bit more confident, so I give it a try, and I don't mind being laughed at. So, but what we found is that speaking the local language is very important in breaking down the barriers that are so easily formed between cultures and between people groups. Yeah.
For those of us that are watching today and don't know where Lesotho is or have no sort of grasp of its history, could you just tell us a little bit about Lesotho?
Sure. It is a strange phenomenon, really. I don't know how many other countries there are in the world that are completely surrounded by a single other country. So if you look on a map, you'll find Lesotho is right in the center of South Africa, the country South Africa. And its history is quite interesting. The reason why it's like that is that there was a king called Moshoeshoe who gathered other peoples to himself who were running away from famine, and King Chaka at the time was expanding his kingdom, and so people were fleeing from that expansion, and so he provided, as King Moshoeshoe, provided sanctuary for people, and he created a stronghold. It was a mountain fortress that he created, which where he managed to protect his people from invading forces from the Boers, the Afrikaans invading forces. He managed to fend off the British for some time, and so his stronghold was never actually overthrown. But there was a time where he, I can't quite remember exactly when it was, in the late 1800s, where he asked the British Kingdom, he asked Britain if they would be able to protect Lesotho as a nation from the people around them. And so it became Basotho land, and Lesotho really only got its independence from the British in the late 60s, so 1968 I think it was. So Lesotho continues today to be a completely separate nation right in the middle of South Africa.
Wow, that really it's incredible and so interesting. And what sort of habitat is Lesotho?
So Lesotho is famous for being if I remember correctly, it's something like the country with the highest low point. So it's something like everything in Lesotho is above 1,400 meters, which is very, very high up. I'm not sure what that is in feet, something like 3,000 feet, but probably more, probably 4,000 actually. It's very mountainous. The lowlands are still very high. Most of the people live in the western part of the nation, which are the lowlands. The highlands are quite inhospitable and very hard to access. So I remember when we planted a church back in 2017, we went for the first time, and I thought, well, that's 150 kilometers, 100 miles, or just less than 100 miles on the map. That should take a short amount of time, and 7 hours later, we got to this village deep in the mountains, and so access is very difficult to the mountain, the highland areas of Lesotho. So I think Lesotho also struggles because at the moment we're at about 80% unemployment. I think officially about 80% of Basotho people in Lesotho they rely on subsistence agriculture, which is why farming has been such a important thing to work on here. Not much of the land is in good use, so it's been something that we've worked on for some time.
You talk about farming. Is that subsistence farming where they just grow as many mealies as they need to live on, or does it go more than that?
It's mostly subsistence farming, and I think that if the yields were high enough, it would be enough to help our nation feed itself. At the moment, most of our food comes from outside, from South Africa. Commercial agriculture is a little bit difficult in Lesotho because there's a limit to how much land you can get hold of. But in terms of if you wanted to put together a farm, land is owned by, well, maybe I can say in Lesotho everyone owns land. So everyone's got a little patch of land, and so I think our thought and our focus has been to try and get people's yields up, so that even if what they're doing is mostly subsistence agriculture. It still covers the need of the nation. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's interesting. And so you mentioned about going up into the mountains and it being a really long drive. Where are the churches that you're involved in with Regions Beyond? Where are they? Are they in the mountains, in the cities? Are there many?
Yeah, so there are a number of Regions Beyond churches in Lesotho. We've got about 17 at the moment. We started off probably with 3 or 4 in the lowlands. The very first one was the one that I was involved in helping to lead, that I was talking about earlier. It's called Rehoboth Church. It's way up in the north. In fact, if you've been to Steve's farm, it's just across the river. So that was the first one. But then back in 2006, or 2005 actually, the church that I'm leading now, River of Life, was planted in the capital city. And then the other churches that we have more recently planted, some have been in the lowlands and others have been in the highlands. And then a couple of years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we had a whole group of churches join in with Regions Beyond, which has been a great joy. And that was with Ndada Nsamani and his group of churches. I think there's 13 of them. They're way up in the mountains in a place called Mogotlo, which is sort of right on the eastern side of Lesotho. Yeah.
And you talked often about growing or farming God's way, I should say. And how's that been? How's it turning out into Lesotho and the areas there?
So it's been challenging. There's no doubt in my mind that farming God's way works. I've seen it work in Zim, and I've seen it work here in Lesotho as well. But what I've learned over the years is that giving people the tools they need to survive isn't really enough. That actually what it requires is patience and support and discipleship. It often requires a mindset change. So there's many factors that lead to poverty in communities. And if we just address, for instance, with Farming God's Way, the farming practice, then what I've learnt over the many years that I've been working in Lesotho, I think it's 15 now, is that if you don't deal with things holistically, you never really see the fruit. And so for about 10 years, we taught, maybe it was 6 years, we taught really tirelessly thousands of families. We taught Farming God's Way too. But unfortunately, just focused really on the technology, which has been sad because, after all that teaching, you then don't see much fruit. And so what we've done more recently is just walk very closely with a few people and trust that God at work in their lives will bring transformation to their communities. So it's a much longer journey, but it seems to be fruitful. So yes.
Oh wow, thank you.